Welcome to Pandora's Box Chat Show. Tonight we look at the impact that divorce, separation, abuse, all of those unhealthy situations has on the child in the home. And with me to discuss that, Felicity Guest.
Hi Leila. Hello viewers, welcome back.
So, you know, often in situations where parents are at each other's throats or decide to separate or get divorced, or perhaps there's emotional, financial or whatever abuse in the home, children are affected one way or another. And I think as parents we often forget how kids are affected through the process of trying to sort this mess out. What has been your experience and the research that you've done on this particular topic?
I remember during my separation where my ex-husband wasn't paying maintenance, and he came down to Cape Town and he took my younger son out and he bought him a pair of rugby boots and one beautiful leather Liverpool soccer ball. And he walked into the house with this very sheepish look on his face. And I said, "Oh, what have you got there?" And he said, "Oh, Dad bought me these things." And my immediate reaction, which I should have thought it instead of saying it, was, "Oh, well, maybe next time when you're hungry you should have a bite of your soccer ball," which is the incorrect thing to say. But, you know, this is what we're talking about when you're all emotional and you're not conscious of what you're saying has on the children. You say those kind of wrong things. And if I think back now, I would not have said that if I could understand down the line what impact it would have, not just on my son, but on his relationship between his mother and father. Because it wasn't his fight. He wasn't divorcing his parents were divorcing each other. And in that way, I brought some of my bitterness and my anger and made it his guilt.
Have you ever thought how that impacted on him years down the line?
I think it certainly impacts. He's very wary of being caught in the middle between his parents because in spite of all that has happened, he loves his parents.
Absolutely.
And, you know, whatever behavior has happened, rightly, wrongly, criminally or not, it doesn't impact on the child's love of their parents.
I think probably if I think about my own case as well, I think we've all, to a certain extent, brought the conversation into the home with the children, especially when it comes to money, because it's the most sensitive issue. There's no food, or the child's asking again for something, and the first thing you would naturally go to is, well, ask your dad. You know, I can't pay for everything. It's why is it always my responsibility? If you want something, you know, he doesn't pay for anything, ask him. I'm guilty of saying those things. And I think we shouldn't blame ourselves too much because we are stuck in that emotional turmoil at the time. But at the same time, I think it is important that we sit and think carefully about how we address these issues with the children so that it doesn't become their emotional fight to fight.
Well, you're absolutely right. And it's not going to change our personal situations. We can't undo what we've done, maybe send our children for some therapy and counseling. But, you know, that other parents going through this, that parents can learn from mistakes that we have made and many others like us. And this is not about, you know, carrying shame and guilt. It's just recognizing we have hindsight now and we can see the impact that it's had. And it's made us aware of the impact that it's having generally on, because the divorce rate is so high, how many children is it impacting on, and why are children so angry? You know, we hear stories of kids running around playgrounds, stabbing each other, beating each other up, and I'm sure that a lot of this has got to do with what they've witnessed and parents not quite being aware enough of the impact that it can have on their children, because the research has shown, not the studies in this country, but in America with the high school shooters, that most of them come from divorced homes, or homes with divorced parents, or homes where there's a lot of abuse that has taken place. So I think it's very relevant and very important that we really look at this and have a lot more awareness and consciousness with our own behavior. So to ask you a question, when you were considering getting divorced, did you take that into account
Absolutely
when you
not.
first started thinking about it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think obviously you think about, and probably why we stay in relationships that we want to get out of, we stay in it longer because of the kids. But I think for me personally, when I hit that emotional dead end where it's like, I need to get out, then it was all about having to get out. If we get to that point where you feel, this is it, I can't take it anymore, I need to get out for whatever reason, whether the other party is guilty or whether you've outgrown a relationship, or whatever the reasons are, you shouldn't feel guilty. You should absolutely do what's right for you, because in my case, I felt I'm no good to my kids if I'm not a whole person, and I didn't feel like a whole person anymore. And this was probably no doing of my ex-husband. And it's not a case of who's wrong and who's right. It was purely just like, this is where I was at in the space that I was in. And I think for all the Pandoras out there, if you really get to the point where you feel you can't anymore, you should make that decision for yourself. But it's always good to have a sounding board, have somebody to discuss it with. In that moment, I certainly didn't consider, well, what about the kids, this and this. But prior to that decision being made, of course, the reason why I've stayed in, it's like, well, the kids are this, they're small, I can't do this, I can't do that. What about the children? How are I going to do this? So you have all of those things playing out in your mind, leading up to that final decision. But I think for me, when the final decision hit, it was like just resounding, I need to do this.
For myself, my girls from my first marriage were young, and I was a conscious choice, because I come from a broken home, that I'm going to make it now, because this is not going to work. There's far too much abuse, and I don't want my kids to go through witnessing the kind of abuse that I did. So I made the decision when they were really, really young. And then in my second marriage, it was at in-between stage, and I had 5 children with a 9-year difference, and I had to wait 10 years. Really, for me to end the marriage, because if I'd done it before then, I think it would have had a lot more impact, negative impact on my children.
You have a beautiful story and an example of such a case.
Yes, absolutely. So this Pandora, her parents didn't separate. So it just gives us, you know, the other side of the story. Her parents had a very volatile relationship, and there was a fair amount of abuse that went on in the relationship. And the kids used to kind of wish that their parents would separate because of the impact that it had on them. And the one night, the parents sat them down around the kitchen table and said, we're going to get divorced. Now, which parent do you actually want to go and live with? Okay, so that's the first thing. Putting the child in a very difficult spot. And the kids, well, Pandora tells, it was her and her brother, and Pandora tells the story that she started crying. And she said, no, but I don't want you to get divorced. I don't want you to separate. I love both my mommy and my daddy. I don't want you to leave each other. And there was a part of her that was excited at the notion of them separating and, you know, things being different hereafter. But they didn't separate. So when she got older and the parents were quite on in years, her dad was diagnosed with cancer. And the 2 years prior to his death, he started seeing another woman, and he very openly started courting her around town. And the mom at that stage really didn't care anymore. One, she knew he was dying, and 2, she had just become so numb that she actually didn't care. And he passed on. And the pain of her and her mother didn't end there, and it was more that what the children experienced, because after he passed on, a whole lot of other stuff came out about things that the mother hadn't told them and that they weren't aware of. It suddenly came to the fore, and she was incredibly angry at her dad. So she couldn't remember the good things because they were always overclouded by all this other information that had come up. And she actually says that, I wish I didn't know this, and I wish I didn't know as much as I did when things were wrong between my parents, because that is what I actually remember, and I can't get to remember some of the good times that I did have with my dad. And she actually very clearly says, I wish my parents had actually got divorced, because then I would have had better relationships with both of my parents.
So on that note, I want to invite Sebastian, who grew up in Holland in a home where dad was emotionally abusive towards mom, and he's going to be sharing his story with us and how it has impacted on him as a child growing up, and now as a grown man, married and having 2 daughters, how he feels about abuse in the home and how we as parents should deal with it to lessen the impact on the children. Do stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Pandora's Box Chat Show. We are talking about the impact that difficult circumstances between parents have on the children. Joining us now is Sebastian, who's going to share his personal story with us. Sebastian, welcome to the show and thank you so much for being willing to share with us.
Hello, Sebastian.
Hi, ladies.
Today you are a father of 2 beautiful daughters. How has your experience of growing up in an abusive home impacted you in decision making with your own daughters?
I think the biggest thing for me was the anxiety around, am I going to be like them? Am I going to be like my dad, how he was with us? And that anxiety always been around, so I never really pictured myself as a dad. So when I got my daughters, it was a great relief to realize that things were different. I had my kids late in life, and therefore I had a lot of time to sort of process things that happened in my life. So it made it a lot easier actually going into a relationship and going into having children. So the whole approach is totally different from what I've seen in my home situation. So yeah, that was quite a relief.
Sebastian, at what point in your parents' relationship did you start feeling the impact of their dysfunctional marriage?
I think as a child you kind of know what is wrong and what is right. It's always that feeling that something is slightly off, and I think for us when we really started seeing it was when we started having interactions with other friends, and you go to visit other families and you see that things happen different. So your frame of reference kind of changes from what you've seen in your family, what you think is normal, to what you see out there with other families, which is a different normal than yours. And I think when it became problematic was when we sort of reached our early teens, when me and my sister started expressing ourselves more, and you get a voice, and that voice was obviously confrontational for especially my dad, because you become critical of his behavior, and that made the situation actually worse.
Would you prefer if your parents had to get divorced when you were still young?
Looking back, I would definitely say yes. Staying in a dysfunctional situation, staying in a bad situation is actually far more damaging for children in developing their social skills than the actual breakup. Yes, the breakup will be traumatic, especially because 2 parents involved and you don't want to choose sides, and it makes it very messy. But at the end of the day, as a child, you also learn that you can change the situation, that you don't have to accept the situation. So if you experience something later in life as an adult or a teen, a similar situation where you're in a bad relationship, then it's easier to recognize it and also make the decision to get out of it, no matter how difficult it is going to be.
So when there was this conflict taking place between your parents, how did your parents engage with you about what was going on between them?
I think there was a lot of pain and confusion from my mom's side, and I think she also felt very guilty towards us to allow the situation to happen, and at the same hand she struggled to actually get out of the situation and struggled to find a solution for the situation, because everything happened so subtle over time, the sort of emotional blackmail, the emotional, bringing my mom down in her self-confidence, that took a huge toll. And I think my mom tried in her own right to protect us and diffuse a lot of situations with my dad, and tried to listen to our story about the things, but she couldn't do much about it. She kind of didn't know how to get out. It was actually my sister and me in our late teens that actually started telling my mom, like, why don't you get a divorce? Why don't you get out of this situation, because you're unhappy and it's just affecting you, and move on.
So how did the abusive situation in the home impact your relationship with your mom and with your dad?
I think it's complex. I think the biggest thing was there's no trust, and it was towards both parents. My dad, because of all the things he'd done to us, all the lies, all the emotional blackmail, and the fact that you also can't talk with your dad about his feelings and about the stuff he's been through, because we know he went through a lot of shit in his life. But my mom, because she didn't get out of the situation, because she didn't find a solution for the situation, and that's sort of the thing we don't. There's no safe place in the house, and you don't trust either parent to look after you. So my only safe place was talk to my sister, because we're both in the same situation. We couldn't even go outside to other friends because people didn't know, people didn't see it, and towards the outside world we're this happy family. So you also had that anxiety of not being believed what is happening to you.
Sebastian, before your dad passed on, was there a change in your and your dad's relationship that you were able to get over that, and that he passed on at peace?
Well, my sister and me, we haven't spoken to my dad for a long time. Although from my side I never really closed the door. It always was a difficult situation because we couldn't really communicate. We couldn't really communicate about feelings. You can't communicate about the stuff that actually happened. So it makes it very difficult to talk to somebody, but you can basically only talk about the weather, because you can't move on without discussing stuff. I think also getting older, you also start forgetting a lot of things, and a lot of things fade a bit, and which also makes it easier to see things from a different perspective, and see it from a parent's perspective, how they grew up, the rough times they had, and how they brought that into the relationship, and how that impacted on their interaction with us as children.
What kind of advice would you give to those parents watching the show that they should do to lessen the impact on their children?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. I think every situation is different, so but I think the most important thing is to talk to people, to help yourself, talk to specialists, also talk to teachers or other people that you feel safe talking about, and also have people that know about the situation that can talk to your children, so they got a safe place to talk about their feelings, about all the things that are happening in your life. But also tell them that things are not okay. It's far more unsettling for a kid not having parents talking to you about what is happening, but seeing there is a lot of bad things happening around them, and they might feel it's their fault, or so I think it's important for them to know that things are not okay, but also that you are working on it, and trying to get out of the situation, or change the situation.
Thank you, Sebastian. We appreciate your input this evening and for sharing your story with us. I'm sure, Felicity, when we share, it always brings about that feeling of I'm not alone in this. And when we share our personal stories, we also help others understand perhaps a situation that they find themselves in, and through that maybe a little ray of hope.
Thanks. And I think when we listen to other people's stories, we can relate to certain aspects of other people's stories, and there's less judgment. Because if somebody stands in the front of a room and goes, this is the perfect way, I think our first reaction is to be defensive and judgmental. And when we share stories, there's less judgment and a lot more empathy.
So Felicity, that's it for another episode. Viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week with lots more. Remember to like, share and subscribe. And if you want to be part of the competition, do comment below. Whenever we hear your feedback, we can improve the show.
We will see you next week.
On that note, good night.
Good night.